So actually, well, can we talk about the I don't maybe not the evil nature of it, although I guess we can, but just as a layperson sees this stuff roll out, there's a patina of credulity to a lot of the stuff that's been spewed, even if they don't understand it, and that
That's right.
comes from the fact that it's quote academic. It comes from the academy in some sense.
That too. Yeah. I
Right?
wasn't thinking that actually when you were saying that, but that is true. That's important.
Yeah. So it comes from the academy, and they don't understand the arguments from the academy, and they don't understand. I mean, frankly, you could spend your entire career trying to detangle someone like Derrida and figure out how like this applies to what right. There's no end to the volumes of gibberish that can be written to support this stuff, but I think a lot of people assume that this is a good faith attempt by the academy to get at real truths about morality and justice and that these ideas just kind of have naturally fallen out of a well-meaning, well-intentioned quest for figuring out what we should do as a society to be moral. When in fact, as far as I can tell, you've got on the one hand that marriage, it's a marriage between people who had a political ideology called Marxism or neo-Marxism and spent their careers trying to justify it by whatever means necessary, including justifying violence. And then you had postmodernists who were like, we're just going to, we're going to navel gaze for a while. Nothing we're talking about is real. I'm not even sure if objective reality exists. But we built these nuclear weapons. If you guys would like to use them for your cause, go ahead. And there actually isn't an authentic, sincere moral exploration behind any of this. Is that incorrect or is that correct?
I can answer both ways. I can say yes and I can say no, and I can mean it in both cases. Okay. So I think you covered the argument, in fact, that it is not good faith. I think that it misses the fact that basically every scholar that's working in it is painfully sincere, in the same way that Christopher Hitchens said that every one of the vast majority of the pastors that he met that were saying, crazy religious stuff were the most painfully sincere people he'd ever met in his life. And so that gives the opposite side. They think what they're doing is good faith. And that transfers, it's funny because, impact versus intent is like one of their things, but right. It transfers to people. They see that they have a good faith. So what people really need to understand is that what this is I tried to do it badly with a tree metaphor earlier, that this is a different way to view the world. And it has a different ethics. And if you're doing good faith and a different ethics, you're doing good faith, but with bad ethics. And if it has a different epistemology, as a matter of fact, is a different way of generating knowledge. And so you have to understand those two things. And when you understand that, you can see how people operating in good faith in service to that worldview are actually not operating in good faith in service to the prevailing worldview. So both things are true at once, if you follow me. How typical of this to be that way. And so
yeah. But they're not. Are they honest about their epistemology, by the way? Because it seems like if they just said that outright, man, people would dismiss it, right?
It slips. I think they genuinely believe it, but it's like I've seen so many conversations where it's like they start to try to dance around multiple truths and multiple realities, and then they have to say the next thing, and then they can't quite maintain it because they don't fully grok their own metaphysic. They don't fully believe their own metaphysic, but I think they do. I think they actually are operating a good faith within a system that sucks. And their ethic is that critical theory liberationism, which is kind of by any means necessary, tear apart the oppressions of society so that we can effect liberation from that oppression as we defined it, which basically means not being communist. And so they have this ethic that's constantly to effect liberation from their view of systemic oppression. That's their entire ethical system. Then secondly, they've replaced epistemology, knowledge production. So if it's philosophy, you have defeasibility, right? I'm going to forward the best ideas I can using epistemic adequacy. I'm going to use sound and valid arguments. I'm going to try to follow existing theories of thought or patterns of thought or known philosophical arguments and extend them or modify them or correct for them or whatever it is. And then you add in the concept of defeasibility, where you're going to then cut down ideas that are incorrect by showing where there are contradictions, where there are weaknesses in the argument. Maybe the argument wasn't actually valid, or its premises weren't actually sound and stuff was overlooked. So this is defeasibility. How might this belief be false? And then you explore whether or not that's the case. And so this is how philosophy proceeds to generate something that is or is like knowledge. And then in science, it's harder than that, because we proceed from theories, which are very robust, built-up objects, to forward new ideas, and we cut those ideas down with falsification, which is do the experiment. As Feynman said, it doesn't matter how beautiful your theory, if it disagrees with the experiment, it's wrong. Right. And that's falsification. And so that's a standard. In this case, they've changed everything. Their epistemology is that they forward ideas from the lived experience of oppression, and they cut bad ideas down by seeing where there are problematics, where it hurts somebody's feelings, where it could cause the maintenance of systems of oppression and so on. So they're operating in good faith in a system that doesn't even think the same way. This is why, it's perfect for your show that you call it Deprogrammed, because people are like, well, isn't this like a cult indoctrination? And I keep telling people, no, this is not indoctrination, it's reprogramming. It's literally changing the way people think ethically and epistemologically about the world. It is a completely different view of the world, which is not the same as an indoctrination.
But I've heard Helen say this before, which I really like. She made the point that a lot of this is really a luxury afforded to them through a society built on the opposite premises of the ones they're putting forward.
That's correct. That is correct.
But they don't. Two trees analogy.
Right. They don't understand how the society works. Right. They have no idea. So when we say the two trees, if we take to that metaphor where I said that the one is a parasite off the other, it's not rooted in the ground. It's rooted in the side of the trunk. But they don't know that. They're just floating around in the canopy. They don't have the slightest idea how a food supply chain works, and they don't care. The food's at the grocery store. Duh. They have no idea how anything works, and they don't care to look. They don't look at the roots. They don't look at the bottom of the trunk. They're floating around in the leaves, playing in the fruit, dancing around. And the tree is actually a parasite growing out of the side, not out of the ground. It is growing out of the side of the tree, the liberal modern tree. And so this is a set of luxury beliefs that can only be supported by a successful and strong system that can produce excess wealth to fund these people from doing this, because subsistence farmers aren't doing critical theory. They don't have time. They're a bit busy, not dying by digging up rocks and trying to plant corn. So this is a set of luxury beliefs that, and I don't know any other way to put it. We want to get to bad faith, but I don't think it is. I think it's willful ignorance about how things actually work. I think it's utopian thinking.
I mean, it almost sounds like you're saying Marcuse was right in some sense, that like there is this established universe of meaning, there is this dumbing down of people, and this affords them the free time to go off. And he thought the threat was that they would go off and support capitalism, but instead it actually enables them to go off and ponder critical theory. I don't know.
I mean, to some degree, and that's when we were saying before, that you said there's a veneer of respectability because of the academy, and I suddenly said, oh, that's not what I thought you meant. Everything that they're saying has grains of truth in it, every bit of it. There are pieces of all of it that are true, and that's why it works. So when they say something like white fragility, some white people actually do throw a fit when they have to deal with looking at race in an uncomfortable way, and they don't know how to do it. It's not totally made up. It's not pulled out of a hat. If it was pulled out of a hat, it'd be harder to believe. There are people who are genuinely put to conflict because of feeling like they're forced by society to constrain themselves into a sex or gender role. So the queer theory thing has that kernel of truth at the bottom, and they can always point to that and say, well, what about the person who blah, blah, blah? And, they give the sad story about, well, somebody grew up, she's a tomboy, and she never felt like she was really a girl, and now she was made to be a girl and wear dresses, and she was miserable, and then she committed suicide, or, something like this. they can always point to those kinds of stories to show that, things aren't perfect, and that there is therefore a kernel of truth, a veneer of truth to it. It's definitely the case that that when you have a very wealthy society that can afford, say, performance artists, or that can afford airy-fairy theorists who don't have to do experiments on things like practical, how do you make the planes fly or whatever. They can do just a airy-fairy theory. When you have enough luxury in society to do that, then people can run off and study whatever it is. Again, Marcuse, it turns out, was incorrect about what fancies they would follow, because he underestimated, I think, the power of the thing he was unleashing into the world, which is bitching about everything. And it's very cheap and very easy to bitch about stuff and look cool. To look like you're the smarter person who figured out the loophole in the system, and everything you ever thought was wrong. Look at how I just blew your mind. I found the counterexample. That's a very seductive way to think, especially to people who are not trained and disciplined enough to do careful, rigorous thought. So, one other element of this then becomes the overproduction of elite cultural professionals. Overproduction of actors, overproduction of performance artists, overproduction of elite academics, and there's just not enough jobs to give these people something to do. And so what you end up with is a large number of underperforming people and a small number of highly successful people who seem to be getting all of the accolades. And a lot of those, it doesn't take all of them. A lot of those underperforming people are very quickly going to become envious and decide that the society is somehow unfairly favoring that jerk. I've had stories like this in my own past.
It's happened in every, like you talked about, we're now at a place where we're looking, because it has become culturally dominant in the mainstream, we're looking at the big picture and working backwards now to explain how it can rot any small group from the inside out, right? Mm-hmm. But back before we got to this point, when we were talking about the small groups, you could see it happening. In the feminist door. So I think of social justice ideology as, there's several doors you can use to get in there. I opened the feminist door to go inside. And in the feminist, intersectional feminist, third wave blogging world, 10, 15 years ago, this happened where there were a certain number of feminist bloggers who rose to the top, who had the successful blogs, who were getting jobs in legacy media, mainstream media, who were writing books. And then a lot of envious other bloggers who didn't have a big platform, who started huge mobbing campaigns where we talk about how they always eat themselves, but a lot of times that's because it's like, you've had your turn at the top, I'm going to pull you down. And they pull people down in the same way they pull anyone down, which is by going after their identity or their privilege, and whatever.
Who they slept with or who they hooked up with that gave them a leg up they didn't deserve. Oh, you slept your way to the top. Yeah, totally. Yeah. This has even happened to me where maybe, I suck at philosophy. That's fine. I don't care. I'm putting forth my ideas. I'm putting them out into the world, and that's what there is. But there's like an entire cottage industry, and I could name names that I won't name, who I know because I've seen screenshots of text messages where they just went berserk. There's this cottage industry. Everything I freaking do shows up on Reddit's r/bad philosophy, saying what a terrible philosopher and how stupid I am. And you can just read the envy. And you're like, oh, Jim, you can't interpret what they're saying. No, I've seen the freaking text messages saying he's stupid, he's a second-rate thinker, I'm a lot better thinker, and my essays aren't getting... Yeah. And it's like, bitch some more. That's what this is. It's a standard form of envy, but what we're now in is a non-standard way to mobilize complaining using social media, and to mob people on social media, or to create Reddit threads about how stupid they are and relentlessly try to drag them down and nip at their toes. Whereas before, you had to put some real effort into harassing somebody into wanting to kill themselves or quit. Not now. And it's now, in fact, it's weaponized to the point where you can just allege something and everybody's like, oh, no, he's a racist. We got to fire him. Quick, get him out. Tearful apology. Then fire him. Oh, your wife said the wrong thing. Fire him. It's like, you can see what this is. It is hard to succeed as it is. We have an increasingly bent gig economy where the gig economy is much more like a free market. Free markets create gilded eras. You have to have proper regulation on markets or else you get gilded eras. If the market's too free, it's no longer free because a small proportion of people get all of the credit. Here's a great example. Gig economy period, though. You have a small number of people, say on Patreon, making loads of money, lots of people scrabbling for some down below, and some proportion of them are just going to get jealous and decide it's not fair that other people are doing better. But in book publishing, the story is that, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but I saw them a number of years ago, that roughly 50% of the royalties for book sales go to the top 20 authors. Not 20%, 20. So there are approximately 2 to 3 million books a year being published, and 20 of them get half of the money. So when you have a wide open democratic situation like in employment, like the gig economy, you have a very few number of big winners and then a very rapid drop off to zero. As a matter of fact, here's another story about this. It's at one point we were discussing, we're trying to figure out what's my speaking fee. And we were all talking about it, it wasn't me personally, but all of us that we were talking about, where's our speaking fee? What kind of a crowd? Well, let's figure out what kind of a crowd we could draw, and we'll figure out our speaking fee from there. And so it was like, well, what kind of a crowd can Jordan Peterson pull? And Jordan Peterson at the time was pulling like, auditoriums, like thousands of 5,000 people would show up to hear Jordan Peterson talk. What kind of a audience could Sam Harris pull? 300 or 400 or 500 people. We go on down the list. What kind of draw do I have? And it's like, we were kind of exaggerating, but the answer is zero. Like if I'm the headliner, it's zero. Zero people are coming to see me as a headliner. Maybe it's 10, but it's like the drop off from 5,000 to, there's like literally, we could go right down the list. I said Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. We could go right down the list and rattle off like all 15 people that can draw an audience that's big enough to make a living doing, say, 1 talk or 2 talks a month, and nobody else. And everybody else is scrabbling for that corner in the market. And again, that envy of some people who decided that it's somehow not fair is always going to be the case. So you saw, in fact, feminism is eaten up with it. Man, they hate each other.
The knitting world. We've done a number of videos on the social justice incursion into the knitting world, and a lot of it just reads as naked resentment of the yarn dyers and the pattern makers who've created a following. It's funny you mentioned Peterson, because I think I first heard him talking about this, about how in any field, let's take music, for example, you're going to have like 50% of the music that we listen to, or like classical music, for example, done by a small handful of composers. I forget what he called that. Is it
the Pareto principle? Is what you're talking about?
Pareto principle.
Yeah. I mean, we're on
it's
steroids
the square root of the.
Though.
Yeah, I think technically it's the square root of the number of people produces half the output generally. So in any organization, something like that.
So we're on steroids with that, because what the internet has done is turned every market like global, or at least national. The journalism market's national. Every market's national now. There's no such thing as a local story. There's no interest in that. There's only that which hits the big time on a national stage, and everything possibly could. And so, just statistically speaking, like imagine, so like Instagram influencers, right? There's Envy City right there. So Instagram influencers, you have people that are getting paid $7,000 to put on a pair of pants and put a picture on Instagram wearing the pants. Like for real. And these people are, raking in money hand over fist faster than they know what to do with it. And that's fine. But the problem is obviously that doesn't extend to most people, because most people can't become influencers, because there is some kind of a distribution, which might be normal. It might be Pareto. It might be whatever shape that defines talent in that particular regard of whatever's selling there. And with Instagram influencers, it's going to have to be like crazy photography skills, or crazy attractive, or crazy athletic, or some combination of all of those. And those are the only people who are, we're talking tail end. So 30 years ago, you mostly had to compete against a local market. So if you were going to be the singer of your town, you only had to be better than, whatever number of singers would show up, 40 singers or whatever. You only had to compete against 40 people, and everybody knew you had to go somewhere like LA, and that's where it got really hard, and that's where all the talent went. And you have all those stories like, oh, you're at the big leagues now and you can't compete. But now everybody's comparing themselves to the top person in the world in their field. And that's who they're actually competing against. And so the amount of ability for that to generate a feeling that it's hopeless, and a feeling that with Jordan Peterson particularly, he was saying some things that really upset a lot of people, and that maybe were even off color in various ways, but he always seemed to back them up within his own views, at least. And there were a lot of people whose views were, God, I could do the same thing he's doing so much better than he could. Why does he get so much attention? And that's just a breeding ground for envy. But when you're comparing yourself against a literally global, or at least national or multinational market, and you're looking at tail end behavior statistically, there are only going to be a few people who are at the top of anything. And then it's only a small proportion. I mean, what is it? Sturgeon's law is 10% or 90% of everything is crap. I mean, it just says that, you have to get to like 1.8 standard deviations above the mean to be good. The definition of good is 1.8 standard deviations above the mean, or whatever the number actually works out to get to the top 10%. And so there's a lot of room for people who aren't able to succeed if they have to compete in a, market of millions versus a market of like 50. And then that generates a lot of, again, overcompetent, overeducated, if it's in academia, people who don't have a gateway to success. We have tons of academics who don't have a gateway to a tenure track professor job and are caught in below minimum wage adjunct hell. And it's so, this happened once when I was at my university, when I was doing my math PhD. I went walking one day down the street to go get dinner, and I had to walk through this protest. And I'm like, so this guy grabs me by the shoulder. He's like, hey, you want to hear about our protest, what we're here campaigning for? And I'm like, sure, what is it? He's like, it's a grad student protest. I was like, oh, I'm a grad student. He's like, well, here's what we're, pay conditions, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, yeah, I don't get paid a whole lot with my stipend, but I'm not like really upset about it. It's okay. It's not good. He was like, well, if you don't mind me asking, how much are you getting paid? And I was like, I think at the time it was $13,200 a year, plus school, plus tuition and fees. And they were like, what? That's like 4 times how much we get paid in the English department. This is an outrage, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh, this. And they were like, why does the math department deserve money? And I literally, I feel kind of like a jerk. Look, I was like 24, but I like looked at the guy and I was like, because skilled labor pays. And I just walked away.
Yeah.
And but when you think about it, if you're creating armies of people with masters and PhDs who can't get elite jobs, who feel like they deserve elite jobs and even bachelor's degrees, and they have tons of time on their hands and they think that they're like the greatest thing since sliced bread, many of them are going to become envious, and they're going to get into these kind of envy theories and just start trying to tear down the thing. You can read this all in their literature. The critical nutrition book, it's like we had a business where we tried to bring indigenous herbs into our nutrition counseling or whatever, and our business failed. And that just shows how anti-indigenous our culture is. No, it shows that your business sucked. That's all it actually showed. And then they're like, so we started to write papers criticizing this culture of anti-indigenous culture, and we submitted them to nutrition journals. And the nutrition journal said, this isn't nutrition. We can't accept this. And they're like, that just shows how anti-indigenous they are. And it's like, oh my God, it's just incompetent people complaining. It's and I know these people in their jobs. I've seen it. I have a friend who fired there's this woman that worked for her. She has a small business, like a dozen or a dozen and a half employees. She has a small business. She fired this woman for incompetence, bad attitude, barely ever working, not wanting to show up, like constantly complaining and causing problems. And the woman tried to like raise a big stink, you're just firing me because you hate women. It's like the boss is a woman, but whatever. And then it all finally goes quiet. This is like 3 years ago. Then George Floyd dies, and she's like files a petition saying that their business is racist. And I have the dirt on how their business is racist. No, you have a grudge.
Yeah.
Talk about a person
but that
eaten
sounds
up by resentment for 3 years. 3 years to sit with that kind of resentment in your stomach. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
You know what that person could have done instead? Got a job, got a real job, done some work they could be proud of and grown into it. But no, it takes a very small number of dedicated complainers equipped with, as you said, Carter, rhetorical nuclear weapons to basically be able to start tearing everything apart that they lay their hands into, because nobody knows how to defend against it yet.
Right. Yeah, I've told this story before, but what you just told is actually similar to why I started this channel originally, because I was running a venture firm and we had a person high on the oppression scale come in and pitch us an idea which was illegal and dumb, and so we said no, and went out and told everyone that we were Nazis because we didn't, they found out that I had retweeted someone problematic, and that became the narrative, and it was all about how there was no introspection at all. It was just all about how it was because we were horrible Nazis that we didn't invest in her, not because actually illegal ideas are probably not a great thing to invest in.